And hi and welcome to everyone. Big warm welcome to you from wherever you're joining. I'm seeing lots of places there in chat. Welcome. I'm always excited that people make time for these conversations, right? So thank you. Regardless of whether you're here to listen, to participate as a speaker, we're really grateful to have you here. The Wayfinders discussions are conversations where we bring to light inclusive ways of doing open access. And there's a whole range of ways that can be more inclusive to do open access. And today's conversation focuses, as Bernie says, on open access books. And I'd like to share a link in chat just so you have this resource of a conversation about sustainable and equitable open access book publishing that OASPA co-organized from a global South perspective. So this was specifically East African book publishers, and we had some presentations from South African publishers as well. And it was very much from the OA Books context. And we had that discussion. It was not a Wayfinders discussion. It was very much more an interactive session. But just last month, we released part of the recording and a report, and that's the link I've put in there in chat. So, we had that discussion from the Global South, and I'm now delighted to welcome a panel to give us their perspectives on using collective action models, right, to open up access to books. So we've got an absolutely stellar panel. They're going to spend a couple of minutes each just giving you an overview of what their approach to open access book publishing is. It'll be a very brief overview, and then we're going to get into discussion and hopefully have plenty of time to address questions from you as well. So if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A area. That way we can see it and pick up on it. Otherwise, do please participate, interact, react, and share links in chat. But if you have a question for us, put that in the Q&A box, please. Welcome again. And I would like to turn it over to Lucy to go over first the overview of what open book publishers are doing with their models. So Lucy, if you want to start, and then we'll just go uninterrupted. You'll have information about each of the speakers in chat as we go from there. Over to you, Lucy.
Thanks, Malavika. Hi, everyone. My name's Lucy Barnes from Open Book Publishers, and I will dive straight into it because I know we're pressed for time. So OBP is a scholar-led non-profit born open access press. That means all of our books are open access from the date of publication, so we don't have any closed access backlist to leverage. And so because all of our books are open access without an embargo, how do we fund that work? How do we publish them? This pie chart kind of represents our income streams for the most recent financial year, so 2023 to 2024. And as you can see, it's a mixed model. We have different revenue streams that support what we do. So last year, the largest was the green chunk there, which is title grants and donations. So we don't charge authors a book processing charge, but if authors are able to apply for funding to help defray the cost of publication, then we ask them to do so. And last year, that was our largest income stream. Although it's worth saying that it isn't always the largest. So the previous financial year, it was actually the smaller of the three main income strands you can see on this pie chart. It's very variable because we don't make publishing decisions based on funding. We accept publication projects based on peer review. And then if there happens to be funding attached that the author can apply for, or that's already attached to the book, then that's great. But if it's not there, then it's not there, and we publish the book regardless. The next largest stream from last year was the library membership program, and this is the collective action part that Malavika referenced. So our library membership program, we now have over 170 library members, and each one pays a small amount tiered based on their size per year, and collectively that money goes into this income stream, and you can see it's a significant chunk of our money that we raise every year. And then finally, the third largest is sales. Probably self-explanatory. We sell paperbacks, hardbacks, and EPUBs for a reasonable price, and then that's the third income stream there. So it's important to say it's not a book processing charge model because we don't charge authors and then waive that fee in certain instances. There is no fee, but if there is any funding attached that an author can get in, of course, we're very happy to have it. And with that money, we published 56 titles in that financial year. And 28 of those books had no author funding attached whatsoever. So those 28 books were all funded via the library membership program and via the sales income. 8 books had partial funding and 20 books were fully funded. So if we ran a BPC model, we'd have published 20 books last year. As it was, we published 56. So you can see that those income strands of the library membership program and the sales are a real accelerator. They really help to scale the number of books that we can publish open access. And the reason that our directors have adopted this model and persisted with this model is because, as I said at the beginning, they're a scholar-led press. They're academics themselves. They had no interest in imposing barriers for authors nor for readers. And I will leave it there. Thank you.
So we'll go straight to Charles. Charles, if you want to talk us through what's happening with University of Michigan Press, please.
Thank you. Can I have the slide? Perfect. Yes, I'm Charles from University of Michigan Press, and building on Lucy's comments, the idea of a hybrid funding model is also very relevant to the University of Michigan Press Fund to Mission initiative, with one crucial difference, which is that we are an institutionally based publisher. So we have the benefit of a parent institution which supports our model. So you can see on this slide a temple with 4 pillars, and you can see that the pillars from right to left are very similar to the ones that Lucy was talking about. But we also have one called Provost at the extreme left, and that is the senior leadership of the University of Michigan who are contributing substantially to our open access program, because they believe that this is part of the mission of the institution to disseminate trusted knowledge as widely as possible, not just for the written by the faculty at the university, but in the areas that the university cares about. So our mission is broadest possible access to trustworthy knowledge. The funding support here comes from other entities who believe in that. So each one of these pillars represents a particular community who gets benefit from the mission. The Provost gets additional reach for the name of the University of Michigan and evidence as support for the humanities and qualitative social sciences, which we publish. The library community purchases our collection, and it just so happens that 75% of that collection goes open access in the front list every year, but they also get unique benefits in terms of access to backlist. Author funders, so again, we always ask, but we never require funding from the parent institutions of our authors, but of course they're promoting the reputations of their faculty members. And sales, there are some readers who still like to have a print copy, and they pay a convenience fee for getting one. Can I have the next slide, please? So one of the questions that underlie all of these sorts of models is, are they sustainable? Do they work? And I think we're moving from a conversation about pilots to a conversation about programs. And does Fund to Mission work? Yes, it does. Over 500 books have been made open access thanks to our model, and especially thanks to the collective library funding that I mentioned on the last slide. And that means over 5 million users of our books, and University of Michigan Press still is in business. I think one of the questions, of course, is how will this change in the next few years? So I've put the qualifier so far, yes, it does work, but that is a qualifier. But this is a sustainable model based on a hybrid funding stream. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. And we're moving straight on now. So Frances, you can have the floor and tell us about Opening the Future.
Thank you very much. I'm Frances Pinter, and I'm talking about the Central European University Press's Opening the Future model, which we've been greatly assisted with from Copen and Tom Grady in particular, who prepared this slide, which some of you will have seen already. In a nutshell, what do we do? Opening the Future was launched in the autumn of 2020. So it's one of the earliest non-BPC collective models. And what we do is have libraries subscribe to packages, or one package, of non-OA books. They choose from a number of packages to do so. And these are backlist titles at a very special price. These books are available everywhere, but not at the kinds of prices that they come in this discounted package. And it's tiered to the size of the institution. So once the libraries make a choice, we work with them and we make the books available to the member subscribers. Now, till now, each package, and we have 5 available, holds 50 titles, and each library selects 1 or even more packages, whatever suits them in terms of their collection or their budget. The income that is raised is used to fund the front list as open access. There is no threshold. We just make individual books OA when we have enough money. We facilitate discoverability and usage through the various platforms that are indicated here in our slide. The subscription period is for a 3-year commitment, and this helps us with planning. It's more transparent, and authors know that their books will be going open access. From a library point of view, after 3 years, the backlist package that they have purchased is available to them for perpetual access, i.e. the library owns those books after 3 years. These packages are, as I said, available at these favorable prices, and also have the features that you see in the lower left-hand corner of this slide. Now, we have 80 libraries that are members, and we have sold 150 packages. This is far less than some of the bigger publishers, but we're a small publisher and we're very niche. And so our appeal is to those libraries in particular that have Slavic studies as a focus area. How are we doing? Well, last year we managed to fund half of our front list to go OA through the Opening the Future program. Of course, we too take BPCs where they are available, but that's in addition to what we managed to achieve through the Opening the Future project. So I think that is about all I want to say as an opener. Looking forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Frances. So we've heard from 3 speakers so far. We'll finally move to Emily from Taylor and Francis. But just before we do that, very, very quickly, sorry, Lachlan, to keep you on your toes, but there is a quick clarification question for Charles, which I think is worth just addressing up front while we're talking about the real nuts and bolts of these approaches. And Charles, you talked about the university sort of provost contribution, and just clarifying that that's an institutional support rather than individual personal donations from the university leadership team.
Yes, that's correct. It's the Provost's office, which is the senior academic funder for the institution.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for that clarification. And now over to you, Emily, because there's a pilot that you would like to talk about from the TNF perspective.
Fantastic. Thanks, Malavika. And it's great to hear from Frances and Lucy and Charles, and to all be in this space to talk a bit more about these sorts of collective approaches to open books, which is certainly dear to my heart. So I'm Emily Farrell. I'm from Taylor and Francis, and so slightly different scale. So the larger publisher side that Frances refers to, we at Taylor and Francis, we publish close to 8,000 books a year, so a rather large program, that covers textbooks, professional books, and monographs. And we've had an open access books program since, I think our first open access book was around 2013. So it's been running for quite a while, and that's always been something of a mixed model approach, but a lot of it has been funded by VPCs. We of course have worked with programs like Knowledge Unlatched over the years, but we wanted to see what we could do with a collective model. And I think out of all of us, Taylor and Frances is the youngest at this. So we launched the model in 2023 with a plan to fund an aim to fund 70 books in 2024. Similar to other models, the focus was on institutional funding, particularly. So working with libraries that we knew already were interested in open access, that were buying Taylor and Frances Routledge books. We also really wanted to make sure that we were focused on topics that we felt were important. So the first pilot year was focused on sort of clustered around UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we had a collection on women's health, for instance, to sort of have that as a way that we structured the collections, 10 books in 7 collections. A similar aim being we wanted to look at ways that we could take the cost burden off authors to do this work collectively, and also that then the books are free to read. In the first year, we've now had some books that have been open for about 4 or 5 months that we successfully opened 26 of 70 books. So not the 100% we'd hoped for, but we had a good start. We had great interest, and so we're in the process of doing a second year of a pilot now. But we have already seen sort of the impact and the increased engagement that we'd hoped to see with the first books that we've had open, and that's been really satisfying to see. We've also had the chance to get a lot of feedback, and in the second year of the model, we've done a few things differently. For instance, we've included backfile access, which we hadn't done in the past. So for each collection that a library supports, they get perpetual rights to a set of backfile titles that the library can choose themselves. So we're hoping that will sort of add to the ability to open more frontlist books.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily. And I'm seeing we already have a couple of questions. So colleagues, do put your questions in. I will make time for questions, but we'd like to get into a bit of a discussion now with this wonderful set of speakers doing different. There's a whole range of experience here, right? Like we have folks who've been doing this for the last 20 or so years, if I've got my facts correct, about when early initiatives started of this sort of doing, open access books without BPCs. And then we've got Taylor and Frances on the other end of the spectrum, 2 years in. Backfile is coming out as a feature for at least 3 of you, with Frances, the opening the future model, and Charles, the fund to mission model. Backlist is a feature. With the open book publishers, of course, they were born OA, always OA, so there isn't a backlist really to talk about. And then TNF obviously having that change and sort of bringing the backlist into the equation. So a range of experience, yet some commonalities. Everybody's mentioning a strand of collective action. Everybody's mentioning perhaps a combination strategy. So you have collective action, but there is another element of funding in the mix. But before we get into further nitty-gritties about the funding flows and things like that, I want to ask a much more human question, if I may, at this point, which is, why do you care about doing open access books and opening access to books, right? My background is journals and the cutting edge of research and books you can still sell to print, etc. Why is this important? And I'm happy for it to be a free-for-all. Any of you can jump in here. Why do you care about this work?
I don't mind jumping in first. I have a long love of books. Personally, I come from a social science background, so I was my PhD is in applied linguistics, and in most humanities and qualitative social sciences disciplines, publishing a monograph, working in long form is still absolutely core to the way that research is done. And if we leave books out of the equation, we are perhaps supporting those scholars on the journal side, but we're missing a huge part of that important research. And I think it specifically is more difficult for humanities and qualitative social scientists. And I think that if we just miss a huge amount of important scholarship that contributes to kind of how, to how societies function, how we understand each other, how we come together. I don't know, I feel like I could eagerly go on and earnestly about why that matters. But I, having engaged in that sort of work myself as a researcher, it matters that this work is accessible to more people.
Thanks, Emily. Charles, if I could put you the question in a different way, what's at stake if we don't open books?
Yes, so I would have answered this differently last year, and I would have still referred to an important point that has been made by Anthony Cond, the president of the Association of University Presses, and Martin Eve, who's one of the, as many know, the parents of many of the other initiatives on this call. And they wrote a piece where they said, without investment in this work, we will reach a bad place. We will reach a world where all scientific work is free to read by the public, but all humanities work is prohibitively expensive. We must avoid this elitist world at all costs. So at that moment, that was really focused on the idea of scholarship. But I think now we've got to a much more existential moment, which is about knowledge and trusted knowledge. And the arguments for open access for the sciences have been focused on innovation and economic advantage. The argument for open access to books is focused on, I think, democracy and the ability to understand knowledge more generally. And I've been inspired by Jefferson recently, because in the US, of course, we're facing a very different environment than we were in past decades, but it's one that really refers back to the Constitution and the founding fathers. And Jefferson wrote, whenever the people are well informed, they can be trusted with their government. And he also wrote how, the stay on tyrannical practices is to have the whole mass of the people being informed. He was talking about newspapers, but he could have been talking about books, and I think he would have been the ultimate open access books advocate.
Thanks, Charles, for that perspective. And Francis, from you, you have the CEUP, it's Eastern Europe, and you might say, oh, it's not today, it's from some time ago that we have a perspective. What do you think?
Oh, well, no, today is even more critical. We're experiencing not just extra usage in our open access material, but also improved sales, all for the wrong reasons, because our part of the world is now in such crisis. But I mean, I agree with everything that Charles and Emily have said so eloquently. And if they hadn't done so, I would have said, well, before now, I would have said, well, STEM is making its way in open access, but we as humanities and social science publishers are handicapped because so many people do not see the need for what we're doing. And the big, I was thinking the elephant in the room, but everybody knows this about this elephant, and it's this trashing of higher education in America, which is seeping sadly over into other parts of the world. And I'm very concerned that the attacks on the institutions, the budget cuts on the institutions will make the library budget cuts that we were kind of anticipating before the 20th of January or November elections, they will be so much worse because it's all interlinked. And if we have fewer academics because there are no jobs, because the institutions are being cut back, where will this all leave humanities and social sciences in keeping our leaders to account? And
Right. If
Make
it didn't matter, the words that are currently being censored wouldn't be censored. So it matters that we focus on making this research as accessible as it can be.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Lucy, I'll turn to you next. And if you want to fold in as you give us your answer about why what's at stake if books aren't opened, if you could also fold in the scholar view here. So, you know, when you are opening this work, what does that also mean for the scholars you work with, the authors, the editors? Give us that view as well.
Yeah, thanks, Malavika. I think that's really an important side of the sort of side of the coin here. So yes, it's hugely important for readers to access this material, and I absolutely agree with what everybody's already said. But I also think that it's important that authors are able to publish OA without barriers, and obviously that's a big part of the point of these collective models that we're all trying to develop. You know, you'll get better research if, for example, academics aren't prevented from accessing work to build their own publications, and likewise, you know, if the work is out there, you know, to be accessed by as many people as possible, then it needs to be written by diverse voices as well. And we don't just want to end up in a situation where authors who can afford it or institutions that can afford it can afford to publish, partly because that can be a way to put the thumb on the scales and say, well, maybe only certain research is going to be funded, maybe only certain research is going to be published open access, and we'll control that financially. And also, I think there's a component of open access that means that once work is published open access, it is much more difficult to censor it. So, you know, unfortunately, we may be starting to see, and in fact have already seen in some cases, published work being censored to eliminate certain terms or, you know, change certain emphases. But if it's available openly, it's much harder to kind of pull that back and say, well, actually, we're going to put something different out there. And I would also add, I think this has sort of been covered, but we live in a world of free information everywhere, much of it wrong. And open access, I think, helps in some way to redress the balance and to sort of increase the store of peer-reviewed knowledge rather than inaccurate information.
Thanks so much for that, Lucy. So I'm going to move next to then the perspective of libraries, and actually this, what I was going to ask you anyway, kind of chimes with a question we've already had here from Catherine Cox, who's asking about libraries. Do you panelists have a sense that they're becoming less likely to support open access packages as the number of requests multiply? So, you know, we've already got the budget crises in higher education and so many other places, and sort of Catherine mentions that and says then on top of that you've got multiplying requests for support for OA packages. How is the picture looking for you in terms of library support given that context? So Frances, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah. So I'm sure my colleagues will have lots to say about all of this. I think it's really important for us as publishers to work closely with libraries to communicate that this kind of approach is actually potentially bringing down costs. It's bringing down costs for some people a bit more than other people, but if we do it well, if we streamline it, if we get the bugs out of the system, and, you know, there's things that people don't like about this aspect of this model or that aspect about some other model, we can actually bring the unit cost per book down quite a bit through these sorts of models. And that's what I would encourage people to look at and hopefully support.
Thanks, Frances. Charles, do you want to come in? You were saying it looks sustainable, at least for now. How do libraries respond when you are asking for support, but the intent is that the content is going to be readable by everyone, right? And more collective models spring up. What's the reaction to the requests you're putting out?
Yeah, and I should explain that I'm associate university librarian also at University of Michigan. So I do see some of these decision-making processes from the library side. And I'm seeing a strong commitment to, in the US, to making these models survive. I think that's very mission related. I do see a trend towards looking for evidence of direct benefit. So that could be affiliation of authors or series editors or reviewers even. It could be unique access to a backlist, but it could be other measures whereby the librarian who's choosing can make a strong case to their parent institution that this has a local benefit, not just a global benefit. And I think that's maybe a shame in some ways, but it's a reality that that is happening. I think the only other thing I'd say is we are a US-based publisher, but I have heard this from other colleagues that we're seeing the majority of our support coming from the US and UK. Libraries outside the US and UK are a bit missing. Sorry, US, Canada, and the UK, and to a lesser degree Australia, are a bit missing in this picture. We're not seeing that many continental European supporters. We're not seeing that many Far Eastern supporters, and I think that's a shame.
Just to follow on from Charles, it's a similar sort of picture I think that we're seeing, that there's certainly still interest in seeing these collective models work. We're obviously at a much earlier stage with this than Michigan and other presses, but you know, I think that there's some uncertainty around you know, just library budgets and what's there to sort of commit to initiatives that are perhaps not that are, yeah, perhaps if they are seen as nice to have, but that's still, we're still waiting to see any massive change in that. I think yeah, in terms of support, likewise, I think we've seen similar patterns as other models where it's a lot of US, Australia, UK, some European, continental European support. But one of the things we wanted to do this year in relaunching Pledge to Open was see whether we could have the model be more appealing to libraries in other places. So this time around, we've had some interest from libraries in India, for instance, in a way that we hadn't had in the past. And I think that also has to do with the backlist books.
Thanks, Emily. Frances, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I wanted to add something about the scale of our program. And one of the issues that we find when we're talking to librarians, there is this attempt to link their commitment to the number of authors that they may have at their institution. And that doesn't work when you're in such a niche subject area. So, you know, we may have no or one author at an institution where Slavic studies is still something that is of interest and is has collection aspirations for the library. And the librarian can't make that link between saying, well, we have X number of authors. So it's that old read and publish concept that was brought in the journal world that's kind of still in the minds of librarians, which we really have to work towards to explain what we're offering is about your collection as a value, and not just because you may or may not have X number of authors that publish with us.
Yeah, thanks, Frances, for making that distinction, because it's all too easy to, you know, for sort of assessments of this sort to follow what's the norm in established ways of publishing and you know, transformative agreements, read and publish agreements. You know, it's that if people like a formula they can default to, right? So you know, in making those assessments of value, to be able to guard against just falling into that where it may not apply, especially in niche topics. And certainly I would imagine in book publishing in the main, it's not as prolific and there aren't as many outputs as there are in any case as journals. So you know, that publish factor, perhaps it doesn't have as high a resonance. But if I could pick up on, you know, staying with the theme of library support and librarian reactions, and we had a little bit of a conversation about regions just now. Panelists, do you feel every reader everywhere must pay, every institution everywhere must pay? What's your take on that? Because obviously you want participation, but at the same time, what's the philosophy there? Lucy.
Yeah, if I could come on that, Malavika. I think the way that OBP approaches it has a lot of overlaps with COPIM, the infrastructure building projects in which we're involved. And a sort of guiding light behind COPIM, which has built a number of different infrastructures to support open access book publishing, is this idea of scaling small. People hear that, they sometimes overemphasize the small and miss the scale, but the idea behind it is that any kind of publisher or scholar-led publisher or institution should be able to engage in open access book publishing regardless of their scale and without having to increase their own size to participate in OA book publishing. And also that that publishing should take place in a kind of local context. I think that's important. I think it's, you know, when we talk about trying to achieve a shift to open access, I don't think that necessarily requires homogenization and that everyone should be doing it the same way. So for open book publishers, you know, we do have library support from different countries. US and UK certainly are important. Europe is a reasonably strong contributor as well. And, you know, of course, we'd be interested in speaking to other parts of the world as well and getting more library support from other regions. But I think it's also important to think about libraries not only as money pots. So, you know, for example, library support us in very practical ways that don't just rely on transferring money to us. Our MARC records used to be created by St Andrews University Library until we started using Tote. Within COPIM, libraries are involved in building the infrastructures that we're creating. They're involved in governing the infrastructures that we're creating that will support, sustain and grow OA book publishing. Libraries are involved in the preservation of books. Libraries are also enormous advocates for us. So as a press, they let us speak to their researchers. They speak internally about the importance of supporting equitable OA books and infrastructures. They speak externally at conferences or even, you know, potentially at a kind of government level in some cases. And of course, libraries can also be publishers. So within the UK, we've got the Open Institutional Publishers Association, there's the Library Publishers Coalition. There's plenty of places around the world where libraries are involved in very practical ways. And so I think part of what we're trying to do within OBP, but probably more as part of COPIM, because that helps to increase our impact and our ability to engage, is to speak directly to libraries and publishers in different publishing contexts and say, well, here's what we're doing and what are you doing and can we collaborate? So maybe one concrete example of that is we're setting up an African OA books discussion group. This is sort of led by COPIM and also by the African Universities group. And the idea is very much to say, as I said, you know, what are you doing? What are we doing? How can we knowledge share? What can we build? What's appropriate in your context and what are you building? So that you can make space for institutions and libraries and publishers to engage with us if they want to and if that works for them, but also, you know, can support them doing their own work. And, you know, so the sort of nutshell point of what I'm saying is I think it's important that we don't try and set up one system that works for everybody, but that we try and develop a system of mutual resilience in which there's kind of local publishing happening in different contexts.
Thanks, Lucy. And certainly my experience has been in having conversations about equitable publishing, inclusive publishing, and collective models in the Global South. When I have some with some stakeholders, the conversation is, you know, it can be that it's absolutely offensive to think that a library in Uganda or Kerala in India will have funds to put towards these models. So in some case, it's just a complete non-starter. So, you know, even from that perspective, taking on board your point about have a conversation and understand the local context, it's really important. One last thing on region-specific stuff is a question that's actually come up from the audience, and I'm just scanning for it now because it has moved. Oh, has it moved? Sorry, folks. Right. So It has moved, and I will move on. Never mind. So the thing I wanted to move on to next is to a question from John Shearer, who says, to what degree are you able to share digital usage of your OA titles with either the authors and or their institutional funders? Because that perhaps also links into the question around support, the relationship with authors, and so on. Who would like to go with that first? Francis, do you want to start us off there?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of conversation about how hard it is to share usage data for open access books where books are distributed on multiple platforms. I'm actually not convinced it's as hard as everybody says it is. I think that as we get our arms around the counter standard and the latest counter standards, there are standardized ways of reporting. And this may be a little bit more of a political than a technological issue, where usage data feels a lot more precious to people who hold it, and they may be a little bit less willing to share it. But we've certainly had a lot of success with support from the OAPEN Foundation in having a dashboard that we can show funders across our list how the books that they're supporting do. We can show authors how multiple books that they've published do. And there are some other initiatives, such as the Opera's metric service that open book publishers uses, which are also very promising. So I don't know, I feel that we're making too much of a meal of this. Actually, if we got down to it, it wouldn't be that hard. And perhaps the problems are more political and social than technological.
Can I add into that?
Absolutely.
I absolutely agree with Charles. Everybody's looking for the ideal metric and the most comprehensive metric, and we're never going to get that. But actually, we're missing something really important, which is understanding impact. A lot of the books that we publish won't have an impact for a number of years. We have to take that into account because we're in the early years of even measuring usage in this very quantitative way. And you can't have the cream without the milk. You have to have a large body of research and books that keep the corpus of humanities and social sciences moving forward with new ideas, new constructs, engaging with people. And for that, you need something more sophisticated than just measuring how many downloads there were each year. What is interesting, of course, is to measure against closed content still, because it's you can if you really want to look at metrics, that is interesting. But impact, that's going to be harder to measure.
Yeah, I just to completely agree with what Francis has said. I think that we're so often in danger of having the metric become the goal, and like where we're seeking high usage, we have to not forget that it doesn't tell us everything. It tells us some interesting things. I think it's really fantastic to see a change in geographic spread, for instance, of readership and how that intersects with the sorts of topics of books. And that sort of levels of usage is quite different when you're talking about journals versus books. But it doesn't really give you anything of sort of quality, right? It doesn't tell you like, well, how has that person used that book? And so, of course, you triangulate that with citation, you triangulate that with policy mentions or altmetric scores and so forth. But it doesn't tell you how impactful that work has been on somebody's thinking or the way that has influenced then how they talk to their community. And I think we're still kind of grappling with the best ways to really understand how to show that and have the right sorts of conversations to really highlight that in a way that isn't just geared towards sort of, all right, the higher the measure of the higher something's used, the better, and therefore that will be how we get more libraries to support a program like this, for instance. I think it's you hope that we can use more sort of qualitative ways to discuss impact and why this stuff matters.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'd also say I think it's important to be sort of clear, particularly to libraries, about the limits of open access metrics. Because as Charles said, we do use the Opera metrics service, which we helped to develop, in fact, and it is something that shows the usage of our books on certain platforms. So we can show you some nice numbers, but it's for certain platforms. And for member libraries, we have their IP addresses and we track the usage of our books in that location to try and give some indication of local usage. But of course, the books are open access. The students could be anywhere accessing them. And, you know, the books are open access on platforms that we aren't tracking. We aren't necessarily seeing how downloads are being used and shared. So it's a very, very partial picture. And I think it's really important to communicate that, particularly if libraries are going to be comparing OA usage with closed access usage, where there is a single gate and you can measure, okay, how many times has it been accessed through this gate? There is no gates with OA resources, so you can't measure usage in the same way.
Thank you. Thank you. Great points, everyone. And I should say we have a fantastic audience here. There are some excellent questions, and if we don't have time for all the questions that are coming through, can I reassure everybody that when we share the recording of this conversation and the overview slides, we will also share some written answers from the panel. So in case you don't hear an answer to your specific question, it will come. We just may not have time for it in the live session, right? So look out for the recording and the resources shared after. But I'd like to ask our panelists another question now, which is around the balance of sort of the pragmatics of sustaining your operation, right? We opened with why you care, and you know, we have mission involved here, not just business plans. So how do you then balance those values with the pragmatics of sustaining your operations, particularly when times are as tough and as pressing and as trying and as uncertain as they are today?
So I could talk about this from OBP's perspective, because I think as a non-profit press, one of the reasons that we were set up that way is because it limited the sort of, I suppose, the people that would be telling us what to do. So, you know, you're in a position where you can make quite autonomous decisions about the direction of the press. The principals have always sort of led the pragmatics, I think, for OBP. So, you know, the directors, and then in communication with the rest of the press, they can talk about, well, what do we want to achieve? What are our red lines? What are we prepared not to do? And then with those boundaries in mind, how can we get to where we want to be? So one example might be, we had a meeting last week, actually, on Friday in Cambridge, and we were talking about various different things related to what we were doing and what the press was going to be doing in the next sort of 6 months to a year. And one of the things that we talked about was, with the situation in America now, if we are asked by American member libraries to change the sorts of language that we use around equity, inclusion, diversity, anything like that, to what extent are we prepared to do that in order to keep that money flowing? And the steer from the directors was very clear that we're not prepared to do that, that there are certain things that if you start to compromise on them, you start to change who you are. And so there are certain red lines that we just won't cross. So I think for us, the principles very much lead the pragmatics.
Thank you. Thanks, Lucy. Anyone else want to come in on treading that line? Charles?
Yeah, I think Lucy gets at it. I mean, this is the existential question that affects all institutions now in the USA, right? I believe in being a pragmatist, and I also believe that there is structural work that's really, really important to continue, that is different from performativity. So my feeling at the moment is that we, you know, if it's a matter of removing certain words from our website, I'm not as worried about that if we can continue to do the structural work that we were always aiming to do. But I recognize, and that is a conversation that will be happening at every institution around the US, as we've seen at Columbia University recently. It's a really, really difficult decision. Is this the thin end of the wedge, or is it a compromise that one makes to actually continue doing one's work? So anyhow, it's interesting that this is a conversation now about more than just open access books, right?
can I bring in an example here? Because at the CEU Press, which based in Budapest, in a country which is not noted for its freedom, we have authors who are writing things which are quite controversial. And we work with the author to try and find a balance so that they're not actually put into danger, because it can be actually dangerous. And one of them, for example, told me that he put all his financial assets into the name of his wife because he was worried that the government would come after him. They didn't think he'd be put into jail for the things he was saying about Orban, but they thought they might bring some bogus cases against him, and that putting his home, etc., in the name of his wife fully was a way to protect their financial resources. Those are the sorts of things that we've lived with for some time.
Wow. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So we have a few minutes left, and I'm declaring up front, I know I won't get to every question. We will come back in writing, but there is one thing I did want to address, which is to get your views, panel members, on a perspective that Kyra Hopkins has put in as a Q&A, which is when we are scrutinizing the sustainability, and I'm reading from her words here, when we're scrutinizing the sustainability of collective funding very, very critically and saying, you know, oh, this is conditional open access and it might be open anyway. I'm paraphrasing Kyra's words here now. You know, should we be fishing for library support? Is that sustainable? Can it work? Etc., etc. When we scrutinize it to such a level of detail and degree, are we holding it to a higher standard than we do traditional models? I mean, is it even appropriate that we examine it so deeply and to the nth degree, right? So if coming back to what Kyra, how she puts it, if one of the collective models were to fold, it would probably spark wider debate about the viability of these sorts of models. But when countless traditional publishers shut down or are bought up, we don't question whether their revenue model inherently works. Is there a meaningful distinction? What lessons do we draw from this? What do you panelists reflect about this as folks who are trialing and or depending on these collective models? What's your view?
I'm so glad that you pulled this question out, because I saw it come through and thought that it was a really interesting thing to try to dig teeth into. I think, like, to hopefully not to be too simplistic about it, but I think change is really hard. I mean, I think that that's sort of the big takeaway. We have systems that structure the way we operate. We have very specific ways that library budgets function. We have all, being on the publishing side and talking to institutions, talking to libraries, worked very closely with librarians who really care about what they're doing, who have partnered with us in such cooperative ways, but who are also working within the structures of how a collections budget is allocated. And so I think that I do think that these models get scrutinized more closely, and I think to some degree what we try to do in the midst of it is kind of like take an even path where we're not sort of knocked off to the side just by small amounts of criticism. On the journal side this year, alongside doing Pledge to Open, we've been experimenting with trying to put 3 journals into a Subscribe to Open model, and there's been similar scrutiny on how Subscribe to Open works. And I think I think it's worth staying the course. If we're hearing a call for change, but we're hearing these critiques, I think it's, you just have to stay the course and be loud about what's working. And, part of hearing about the different models on this call is, hearing how these variations do work, how they do support a research community. And it's really great to hear it.
I was at a conference last year, and Demi Verbecker from KU Leuven was talking about this, and he was saying because he supports quite a lot of collective OA models through the library, and he was given this list of questions he had to ask of each one and ways to interrogate them. And he said, well, I'm prepared to do this for all of these, as long as you're prepared to spend the equivalent amount of time for the money spent asking similar questions of, for example, Elsevier. And I think that pushback was effective, and they sort of gave him some more autonomy with investigating these models. But I think it's true. And I think there's also maybe a lack of tolerance with experimentation and uncertainty. We all want to say, what will this look like in 5 years' time? What will it look like in 10 years' time? And I think at the moment, a lot of things are looking a lot more uncertain than they were. And while that presents threats, it might also present some opportunities for change. And I think some of our received wisdom might not look so solid in a few years' time.
Thanks, Lucy. Frances, what do you think?
Yeah, well, going back in the early days of this model, but also with Knowledge Unlatched, when I first set that up, librarians were asking, how do we know that you're not stuffing these models with the worst books because you want to make sure that their costs to you get covered somehow through these support systems? And all I could say to that is, you're going to be judging us by our books, and we want to put our best books forward, if there's such a thing. Of course, all our books are wonderful, but we would like to put the books that we think have the broadest appeal as monographs, so that you can see the impact that it has as early on as possible. So the incentive to have absolutely really top quality content is right there. And the librarians have, through all these measuring techniques and impact and metrics analysis, the tools with which to take a view of whether what we've offered them is worth their investment, which I would argue it certainly is.
Yes, thank you, Frances. Trust is a theme that comes up all the time in these discussions. Charles, what do you have to say?
Yeah, very briefly, it's just to say, I think we ask for it as well, right? Because openness is a way of doing business. It's not just a business model. So by reaching out and saying, you are all shareholders, stakeholders in our models, these are the collective funded models, we are asking people to query us, to ask us to be transparent, to ask us to be accountable. And so when we get more scrutiny, perhaps than other publishers, that's what we've asked for. And it's absolutely appropriate.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, we are at the top of the hour. Thank you. I will just close by saying, because trust has come up again there in what you said as well, Charles, and trust is built by action, not just by intention, right? So there we go. Thank you, speakers, for contributing your time. Thank you to everyone attending. We will leave the chat open and stay live for you to pick up any links, any resources, and please stay tuned to get the recording, the slides, and the Q&A for questions we haven't had the time to answer. Thank you all so much.